a very warm welcome. And especially, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our Mind and Life Europe friends. My name is Cornelius Pietzner, and I serve as Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe. Again, thanks for joining us this afternoon for our second Mind Matters webinar and the 7th webinar for the Mind and Life friends in our series. And we're delighted today to welcome our longtime friend and colleague, Richie Davidson from the Center for Healthy Minds in the United States. In regard to the format for this webinar, Dr. Davidson will speak for 30 minutes. And as announced, the topic of the webinar is Well-being is a Skill. And after the presentation, we will proceed to your questions and responses, and we'll conclude the webinar in 1 hour at 7 p.m. Central European Time. Please use the chat function on your screen to type any questions that you have to our speaker. And you can do this at any time during the course of the presentation. And I will do my best to sort the questions out and to present them to Richie when he is finished speaking. And we'll also be listing an email where you can ask questions that we don't have time to answer, or even general questions about Mind and Life Europe, and particularly questions about the Mind and Life Europe Friends program. Of course, we invite you to visit our website, where information about upcoming events are also announced. So now a short word about our presenter. Dr. Richie Davidson is the William James and Vilas Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the founder and director of the Center for Healthy Minds, which, by the way, is a wonderful name, the Center for Healthy Minds. He's best known for his groundbreaking work studying emotion and the brain. A friend and confidant of the Dalai Lama, he is a highly sought-after expert and speaker, leading conversations on well-being on international stages such as the World Economic Forum, where he serves on the Global Council on Mental Health. Time magazine named Davidson one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2006. Richie is widely published with more than 375 articles and 14 books. Richie, we're delighted to welcome you for this webinar this evening, and I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cornelius, and thank you all at Mind and Life Europe for all you are doing to promote the vision of Francisco Varela and His Holiness the Dalai Lama in bringing the great contemplative and scientific traditions together. It's really an honor to be with all of you today. And in this short presentation, I'm going to talk informally, mostly, about this very simple conclusion that we have been led to in our work, but we think very radical conclusion, and one that we hope to promote in a global, widespread way, which is that well-being is a skill. All of the scientific work that we've done to this point leads us to that really simple but radical conclusion. And what I'd like to do today is to say a little bit about some of the science that underlies this work, the scientific insights that have provided a foundation for this work are really important and helpful in appreciating the significance of the fact that well-being is a skill. And then to the rest of the time, I will spend describing a framework that is a framework central to much of the work that we're doing today in our center. Also, it is a framework that has guided the development of an app that we have introduced called the Healthy Minds Program, which is freely available throughout the world. And it is a framework that is guiding a lot of the science that we're doing. So with that as a very brief set of context setting statements, let me begin by discussing a few important concepts in modern science that provide a foundation for this work. And one of them is a word that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and that is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity simply refers to the fact that our brains change in response to experience and in response to training. And I often say that our brains are changing wittingly or unwittingly. Our brains are constantly being shaped by forces around us. And most of the time, we're only dimly aware, if we're aware at all, of what those forces are. And those are forces over which we have typically very little control. And our minds are constantly being shaped, and through that, our brains are being shaped by these forces, cultural factors, interpersonal factors, environmental factors. There's a whole host of factors which are constantly shaping our brain, beginning before birth in the intrauterine period. And actually, there's a whole story about that itself that is really fascinating. So against this backdrop of these forces that are constantly shaping our brain, there is also the invitation that we can actually play a role, an intentional role in shaping our own brains. And the remarkable fact is that when we train our mind, when we cultivate healthy habits of mind, it turns out that our brains change. And they change not only functionally, but they change structurally as well. And it doesn't take that much to show a change in the brain. Whether those changes endure or not is another question. But the fact of the brain changing, particularly changing functionally, is something that can be shown literally in a matter of minutes. And so the very mechanisms which are responsible for a lot of human suffering, which is adversity induced and trauma induced plasticity, those very same mechanisms can be harnessed for awakening. They can be harnessed to promote human flourishing by taking advantage of the fact that when we train our mind, we're also changing our brain. So neuroplasticity is really important, and it's difficult to overestimate how significant this is. Related to neuroplasticity is another concept that is the equivalent of neuroplasticity in the realm of genomics. And this is what we call epigenetics. Epigenetics is the science of how genes are regulated. So we all have a sequence of base pairs, which is our DNA. And for the most part, in most people, that sequence itself is not going to change over the course of our lives. But what does change is the extent to which any gene is turned on or turned off. We can think of most genes having little volume controls that can vary from very low to very high. And those volume controls regulate the extent to which a gene is expressed, the extent to which it is manufacturing whatever protein it is designed for. And those mechanisms, those epigenetic mechanisms, are highly dynamic and change all the time. And again, they change wittingly or unwittingly. Most of the time, epigenetic changes happen unwittingly. Most of the time, we have no idea of the forces around us that are inducing epigenetic changes. And we know that epigenetic changes accompany adversity and destructive experiences. They also accompany experiences that are health and growth promoting. Let me give you an example of the latter. We know that the way a mother behaves toward her offspring can induce epigenetic changes in the offspring that actually affect the offspring's experience, their behavior, their brain chemistry, and their brain structure. And these epigenetic influences are powerful. Recent evidence suggests that they can be passed down for at least one or two generations. So these are influences that can persist for a long time and can even be intergenerational in their influence, which is really kind of remarkable. And it may, to some of you, sound Lamarckian, a thesis that was undermined and proven to be incorrect, although the epigenetics work in the modern era gives us a mechanism through which acquired experiences can indeed be passed down at least one or two generations. So these experiences and the impact they have on epigenetics gives us another set of mechanisms to explore in understanding the impact of strategies to train the mind and the heart in ways that would promote well-being and human flourishing. And we know from research that we've done, as well as research that a number of other scientists have conducted, that meditation practice can induce epigenetic change. There's no doubt about that. And it can induce these epigenetic changes rapidly, much more rapidly than I think most people previously thought was possible. We've published evidence showing that you can see an epigenetic change within the period of a single day. So we've brought long-term meditators into the laboratory. We've had them meditate for the day in a day of intensive practice. We've taken blood samples before and after the day of practice. And we compared it to a control group, a group of participants who aren't meditators, but come into the lab for a day of leisure. And they're sedentary. They're not moving around much. They have the same food, and they don't show these epigenetic changes. So these are the kinds of findings which lead us to believe that strategies to train the mind can induce changes in the brain through neuroplasticity and can induce changes in our gene expression that are induced through epigenetic changes, and that these can be induced rapidly, and they likely underlie the enduring changes in well-being that we find occur with longer-term meditation practice. Dan Goleman and I wrote a book that we published together that came out in the US in 2017. And in the United States, the title was Altered Traits, which is a play on altered states. Altered traits refers to the notion that meditation practice can induce long-term changes in a person's demeanor, in their behavior, in their experience, changes that stick, changes that impact ideally every nook and cranny of a person's life. After all, if all that happened during meditation is we had some experiences, and then as soon as we stopped formally meditating, we returned back to our old baseline, what would be the point of meditating? It would be kind of like taking a drug, and you would get high and then it would wear off and you come back to the same person you were before. It turns out that that's not the way it happens. What happens is that the baseline itself begins to change. And this is when we believe that there is an altered trait that is occurring, an enduring change. And this is why we think of well-being as a skill, because these are long-term changes, enduring changes in the core constituents of our well-being that persist over time. So let me now share with you a framework for understanding the plasticity of well-being. And I'll show a single slide. I'm only going to show one slide today. I'm doing this mostly as Richie Unplugged. Okay, can you all see this? Yeah, okay. So this is 4 pillars of a healthy mind, which is our framework for understanding well-being. And I should just mention that this framework and the scientific basis for it is now in a scientific paper. It will be coming out very, very soon in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and freely available once it's out. It should be out in the next couple of weeks. And this is a framework that we've spent a lot of time in our center working on, and represents what we consider to be the intersection between the contemplative traditions, particularly the Buddhist contemplative traditions, and modern science in articulating the core elements that are associated with the plasticity of well-being. So this is the overlapping sector of that Venn diagram, if you will. And it holds that there are 4 key pillars. The first pillar is awareness. It's where mindfulness would be. It's about being present. And it also includes 2 important capacities that humans have. One is the capacity to voluntarily regulate their attention. And the second is the capacity for meta-awareness. Meta-awareness is knowing where your mind is, or knowing what your mind is doing. Now, that may seem a little strange to some of you, but how many of you have had the experience of reading a book where you read each word on a page, and you may read one page, you may read a second page, and after a few minutes, you realize that you have absolutely no idea what you've just read. Your mind is elsewhere. You're lost. But that moment that you recognize that is a moment of awakening. It's a moment of meta-awareness. And that capacity to know what our minds are doing, we believe, is more well developed in humans than it is in any other species. And it is absolutely key, we would say necessary, for promoting any kind of transformation. We would say meta-awareness is a necessary condition for transformation of any kind, personal transformation. So awareness is very important. The second pillar of well-being we call connection, and it's about feeling connected to others. And it includes qualities that are essential for healthy social relationships, qualities like appreciation and kindness and compassion. The third pillar of well-being we call insight. And insight is really about self-knowledge. And it is about curiosity about how our minds actually work. We all carry around a narrative about who we are, a self narrative. And we know at the extreme end of one distribution, there are people who have a very negative self narrative. They have negative self beliefs, and they actually hold those beliefs to be a true description of who they are. And of course, that's a prescription for depression. And so part of well being entails not so much changing the narrative, but altering our relationship to the narrative so that we can see the narrative for what it is. And finally, the last pillar of well being is purpose. And purpose is about staying motivated. And it is about clarifying your true north, your sense of direction in life. And most importantly, it is about aligning more and more of your everyday behavior around that sense of purpose. So, can you envision that washing the dishes or taking out the garbage is related to your sense of purpose? So, each of these four pillars of well being exhibit a few things. One is they all are central to well being, they all exhibit plasticity. They can be changed by experience and transformed through training. They each have a unique set of neural circuits that are associated with them. And they each also have some specific biological consequences or correlates that are associated with them. And so these are what we believe to be the necessary and sufficient conditions for promoting well being and optimal human flourishing. So, in the last few minutes of this presentation, I'd like to just describe a little bit about our motivation for developing this framework, for also putting it into an app, and give you a feel for some of the current work that we're doing that is predicated on this framework. One of the messages that the Dalai Lama gives to me and everyone else whenever we see him is to remind us of the 7 billion people on this planet. And that if we are going to make a difference, we need to develop strategies that will be acceptable and available to as many people on this planet as possible. And so this is a framework for understanding and cultivating well-being that we believe can be presented in a way that is acceptable to anyone. Moreover, we're developing versions of this for different age groups. We're developing a version for college students and also for younger adolescents. With this, we're also developing a set of measures that measure each of these four pillars of well-being. And in our app, if you go to our app, you'll see that there is a simple way that we measure it in the app itself so that people can see how they're doing. You can actually track your progress and see how you stand on each of these four pillars of well-being. One of the areas that we're intensively examining these days is trying to develop better and more robust measures of well-being. One of the facts of modern society today is that we all carry around these devices in our pockets, our smartphones. And virtually all of us have these devices that we carry. And there certainly is a lot of uh, destructive qualities to these devices, and they've been responsible for countless human suffering, but they also can be harnessed for the good, we believe. And so the fact that we have these mobile devices allows us to disseminate these kinds of practices to a global community. It also enables us to potentially measure well-being at scale. And so one of the things that we've been very interested in is the possibility of developing passive measures of well-being. That is, measures that do not require any direct user input, that can be just pulled off your smartphones. And I can talk more about that during our question and answer period. But if we are able to do that, and we believe it is possible that we'll be able to achieve that in the next few years, then we would have a real-time index of a person's well-being, of course, with their consent. If we are able to have a real-time index of variations in well-being, we can potentially develop micro-interventions that are delivered right in the moment. So for example, if you're about to send a nasty email or text to a coworker, maybe it's time for a 30-second practice to recognize what's going on in your mind and your body to help you in a way which might lead to a change in your behavior. Or you might be entering a meeting that's a very important meeting. And in the 30 seconds before that meeting, you can be reminded that now is a time to do a practice of appreciation or whatever it might be. And so this may sound a little bit um, dystopian, but the fact is that these devices are not going to go away. They're here to stay. And we are exploring the possibility that we can actually harness this technology for the good. And so that's an important domain in which we're working. And we hope to see some progress on this in the next few years. So I know my time is now finished, and I would like to end by expressing my gratitude again to Mind and Life Europe for all it's doing. And I know that there are many friends of mine who are on this webinar and who also are playing important roles in Mind and Life Europe. And I just want to send my warm greetings and also appreciation for all you are doing. So thank you all so much.
Richie, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. So much in such a short time. I want to jump straight into a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with a question from Susan Hopkinson, which is, I think, an important question. I had a similar one myself, which is as follows. Is the implication of the epigenetic change from meditation that it could also resolve some of the inherited effects of early childhood trauma and perhaps other negative effects? Or have I conflated two separate things?
It's a very good question. And I would say, yes, it does have the potential of fundamentally altering an epigenetic transmission of a traumatic experience. We do know from really hard-nosed science that there are epigenetic changes that are induced by trauma, and those epigenetic changes can be passed down, again, at least one or two generations. And in principle, it is possible for practice to alter those same epigenetic marks, as we call them, that are associated with trauma, to potentially modulate, modify those in inherited traumatic experiences. And I put inherited in quotes because this is not uh, a genetic transmission; it's an epigenetic transmission, and those mechanisms are different. And it would take us uh, into some very technical territory to go into the details there. But suffice it to say um, that the implication, though, is the same. And but one of the things I want to end this answer with is to say that there's so much we don't know. We don't know the extent to which meditation can reverse these epigenetic effects of trauma. It's likely that it is only through intensive practice that these kinds of really significant epigenetic changes are going to produce their effect. And in several recent studies that we've published, we've uncovered evidence, and it's showing up more and more, that there is a difference between daily practice and retreat practice in its effects on these biological mechanisms. And the data are quite consistent in showing, not surprisingly, that retreat practice gives you a bigger bang for your buck.
Mhm.
Even if you match the overall number of hours. So we're not here talking simply about duration. We're talking about the quality of the practice, it seems, is different in retreat practice versus daily practice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to just plow on because we're going to have a number of questions. If I could ask Clayton, if at all possible, to write your question in the chat room. Okay, Richie, the next question is, are there causal links between your four pillars? Hang on a minute. I just jumped away from me. Yeah. Are there causal links between your four pillars? Are some more foundational and some more like outcomes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the most honest answer that we can give at this point is we don't know. I think that from the contemplative perspective, I mean, there are people on this call who are much more knowledgeable than I am about this. And so I would certainly defer to their knowledge. But what I would say from my limited understanding is that in at least the Buddhist contemplative tradition, probably some of these would be considered more foundational than others. But I don't think we know from a scientific perspective. And my own view is that one size is not going to fit all. Different people are going to need different things, which is also, by the way, one important scientific set of scientific questions around this. Can we do a better job of helping people identify practices which are most effective for them given where they are in their own cognitive and emotional style? And so, in the traditional Buddhist contemplative tradition, you would typically get awareness practices first as a foundation. And in our app, we do have that first, but we're actually now testing empirically whether some people may actually benefit from another ordering. We don't know the answer to that yet.
Mhm. Okay, good. Good, thank you. Maybe another, I think another interesting and important question is, have you worked on the impact of faith on well-being?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The answer is not really, although I do think faith and purpose are connected. I think people who identify with having a strong faith would also say that they have a strong purpose in life. That is one of the things that psychologists, one label that psychologists have given to certain kinds of values is self-transcendent values. That is, values that go beyond oneself. Um, and those self-transcendent values are really important for well-being. And I think faith, you can almost think of faith as being a self-transcendent value, at least in certain traditions. Um, but we haven't studied it very explicitly.
I'm going to just go on. There are more and more questions. This one comes close to the title of your presentation, Richie. Next to genetic and neurological factors, can you address in how far you see well-being as an actual skill?
I think that the analogy to skill is a useful one, because we know that skills are acquired through practice. They actually require a form of learning that we in neuroscience call procedural learning. Procedural learning is um, skill-based, it's acquired through practice, and it is uh, um, associated with different brain circuits than declarative learning. Declarative learning is learning about concepts, about stuff, whereas procedural learning is embodied learning. And so we think of well-being as requiring both. Um, but in our culture, in Western culture, declarative learning is so much privileged over procedural learning. We think that we can teach, kids to be emotionally intelligent and to be honest by sitting them down in a classroom and telling them the value of honesty. That's not going to make you an honest person. And in order to do that, it requires procedural learning. And the same is true for kindness. You can sit a kid down and teach them the value of kindness, but that's not going to make them a kind person. It will require practice. And so I think that the word skill is appropriate for those kinds of practice-based activities.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of questions because they have similar dimensions to them. And the question would be, how can people learn more about these four pillars, and how can one introduce them into one's own life? Of course, you mentioned the app. And how can we use the framework of your programs outside of the Center of Healthy Minds and in other contexts and in other settings?
Yeah, so you can learn about it on the app, as we said. There's a lot about this on our website. And as soon as this scientific paper that presents in a scientific framework these four pillars of well-being is out, which should be in the next couple of weeks, it will be freely available on our website. So please check, and you can download it very, very soon. In terms of the application in everyday life, the goal of this is really for these pillars, if you will, to be vibrantly expressed in everyday life. And the whole purpose of engaging in practices to strengthen each of these four pillars is so that they are expressed all the time, 24/7. There's really no context that would be inappropriate for their expression. And so, but this requires practice. We forget to apply them. And so this is why we engage in formal practice, is really to remind ourselves. And these are all qualities. Every one of these qualities is qualities that really are an intrinsic part of our mind to begin with, but we're just not very familiar with it. And so we engage in these practices to become more and more familiar with these qualities of our mind so that they arise more spontaneously.
Do you think, Richie, that there's value, or are you open to having kind of an active feedback loop to focus your framework on differentiated target groups that then could be, kind of adapt, kind of your top line research and reflect back some of the learnings to your center? Does that make sense?
I'm not exactly sure what the critical implication of that question is. If the question is, are we open to feedback about these dimensions? Absolutely. I mean, we regard this very much as a work in progress and not at all a kind of final statement about this in the least. We also, part of learning these skills is, I think, about getting feedback so that we can benefit from the feedback um, in our learning of these skills. And I also should mention that we are developing targeted approaches for different sectors of the population. So we're doing work, for example, with teachers, where we have some specific content that's really layered explicitly for teachers in the teaching profession. We're developing a version of our app for people who are suffering from depression, because we think that the cultivation of these skills will actually be directly helpful as an antidote to people who are suffering from depression. And we're going to be doing a randomized controlled trial with a version of the app for clinically depressed patients. So that's coming down the pike very soon. And then we're also doing some work in the workplace itself, particularly in workplace settings that have been challenged by the pandemic. And we are trying to do our small part in helping to cultivate resilience during these times with these strategies.
Great, thanks. That's a very helpful response. Are the changes different whether the subject has his or her own motivation or when he or she is given the instructions?
I mean, a lot of our work suggests that it's really important that a person choose to do this herself or himself. And we are not big fans of requiring people to do this in some way. We think that the element of voluntarily choosing is really important and is itself contributing to a person's well-being. And so the work that we're doing is pretty much based upon the assumption that we're giving people the choice and they are opting in. We're not doing any work where we're requiring a person to do this in some like workplace setting. It's always voluntary. And we think that that's going to be important.
Okay.
But I should also say, one of the things that I frequently remind people about is there are a lot of things that we do voluntarily that are like second nature to us. And one example that I frequently use is brushing our teeth. When human beings first evolved on this planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. And I'm sure that every one of you on this webinar brushes your teeth at least a couple of times a day. And this is not part of our genome. We do this because we consider it important for our personal physical hygiene. And what we're talking about is something important for your personal mental hygiene. And I think most people would agree that their minds are actually more important than their teeth. And yet, there's such a large segment of the population still that doesn't care for their minds in the same way that we care for our teeth. And I have the conviction that even if we spent as little time as we spend brushing our teeth, if we spent the same amount of time in a genuine and authentic way, nourishing our mind, this world would really be a different place. So that's a challenge. And it's actually something that I think is a public health need. And any of you who are interested in working on this challenge, I would love to find partners to do this with. But if we can get a significant swath of the world's population to spend as much time as they spend brushing their teeth, nourishing their mind, we can change the world together.
Now you've really given us something to bite into. Okay, next question. Through a repetitive meditation, new neurons are built up. Is it possible to minimize or cure brain damage in the form of depression or car accidents through meditation?
Well, meditation is not a panacea. Meditation is not going to cure everything. The Dalai Lama frequently jokes that if meditation was so great for your physical health, he wouldn't have pain in his knees. And he still has pain in his knees. So it's not going to do everything. And there's a lot of hype around around the putative benefits of meditation. And I think we need to be appropriately cautious. Now, having said all that, I don't think that we're anywhere close to understanding what the further reaches of possible change might be. We just don't know. We haven't given it a chance yet. So we don't know, for example, to what extent meditation practice may be helpful in at least decreasing the symptoms of dementia in a person who might, for example, be genetically at risk for dementia. We just don't know. And this is an example of a concrete area where new research is critically needed. And we can do this kind of work now. We have the right tools and we know what the right questions are. And so if there were interest and support, this is work that can be done and we think will really make a difference. So this is all on the table, but we just don't know at this point in time.
When you're making the difference between the daily practice and the retreat practice, and you mentioned that you see more effects in the retreat practice, are you talking about short-term or long-term effects?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I was not specific when I mentioned it earlier. Mostly what we're talking about are enduring effects, longer term effects, effects that we would call trait effects. That is, effects that specifically don't depend on you being in a formal meditation state. So effects that persist beyond the period of formal meditation. And they range from very basic biological effects. So for example, respiration rate, the rate at which you breathe, is impacted by long-term meditation practice. And it's more impacted by retreat practice. People who've meditated longer breathe more slowly. And if you have meditated in a retreat context, you breathe more slowly, even more slowly. That's just one of many examples. We also see effects on brain aging. All of us, no matter how much you meditate, all of us are aging and our brains are aging. But for some people, our brains age more quickly compared to our chronological age. And for others, our brains age more slowly compared to our chronological age. And so we and other scientists too have asked the question, does meditation actually impact the rate at which your brain ages? And we published a paper not too long ago on it was a case study of a very, very long-term meditation practitioner, Mingyur Rinpoche. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of him. And Mingyur Rinpoche has spent many years in formal meditation practice. And we had the occasion of doing serial MRI scans over the course of 12 years in Mingyur Rinpoche. And what we've shown is that over those 12 years, the rate at which his brain is aging is much slower than the rate at which other people who have not engaged in meditation, the rate at which their brains are aging. So that's another example of a really fundamental kind of trait difference.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Another question. The 4 pillars that you mentioned for a healthy mind, do you believe that they can help someone with addiction?
Yes, absolutely. And there are good data to show that. One of the things that we know about addiction is that the proximal cause of an addict using whatever substance she or he uses is an urge. And there are things that we can do to train our mind so that we can initially, at least, change our relationship to an urge. It doesn't necessarily mean the urge will go away. It might eventually subside. But what we can do in the short term is we can change our relationship to the urge. And in so doing, we can have a dramatic impact on addiction. So I believe the answer is a resounding yes here. And I think this is one of the areas where there's a great potential for the application of meditation.
Wonderful. Just a short note to everybody. As I think we've already indicated, we have a link to the app that Richie is mentioning in the chat room, also a link to the Center for Healthy Minds. Richie, when your paper comes out in a couple of weeks, where might that be available? Is there a link that we could make available to the viewers here where they could access this?
Yes, absolutely. You can get it from our website. There's a section of our website on science. If you go to that section, you'll see a subsection with publications, and it will be right at the top of those publications. And there'll be a link. You can click on it and freely download it.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Okay, so we can make that available. And then maybe one quick question in regard again to the app. Is it going to be available in multiple languages, particularly Spanish?
Yes, in fact, we just finished the Spanish translation we have part of the app is a 30-day foundation course. It's the initial sort of introduction to the 4 pillars. And we just received back the Spanish translation, and it is being now disseminated in Mexico on a pilot basis. And we will make that freely available to the world as soon as we complete sort of the quality testing that we're doing now. And we've made a commitment to keep the app freely available forever. And there's no hidden paywalls. It is absolutely free, and it will be freely available forever. We've are doing that with the aspiration that this can help remove a barrier that might enable these practices to be disseminated widely.
Great. Maybe one more quick question, because we're getting towards the end of our time. I'm going to read this slowly. The question is, does the neuroplasticity that is being reported here tend to blur the traditional distinction in Buddhist and other contemplative traditions that the ordinary mind, even if rational and trained, is cognitively different from the deeper cognitive and affective experiences that emerge after many years of meditation practice?
Ooh, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure what this question is asking. Um, I would say that first of all, as a meditation practitioner myself, um, one of the uh, one of the things that's so important to me is to have a sense of humility about our science. Our science is, yeah, I mean, it's really cool and it's really fun and we're learning a lot, but it's a tiny, tiny fraction of uh, of our experience. And there are a lot of things that I have been exposed to in my journey as a practitioner that I cannot wrap my mind around scientifically. And so it just underscores the fact for me that we're still at a really, really beginning stage with our science. The Dalai Lama loves to kid me about this and says that our science of the mind is in kindergarten. Uh, and so there's a lot of stuff out there that we just don't understand and cannot explain in any convincing way through currently understood scientific mechanisms. And this has resulted in me. I work with my students around this, just cultivating an attitude of humility and of not knowing, and being able to rest in that uncertainty. And really, I think that's probably a good way to end.
Mm. I'm thinking the same thing. That's actually a wonderful thing, a wonderful way to end, and to kind of share that message. Richie, what you probably can't see in all these questions here are the many, many thanks and expressions of gratitude from participants that are coming towards you, that in the questions, or at the beginning or at the end of the questions. And it might be interesting to know that although this is a webinar hosted by Mind and Life Europe, and particularly supporting our program for the Mind and Life Friends, again, to which we warmly invite everyone to take a look at on our website, we do have participants from all over the world. I just see from France, from Ireland, from Chile, from Switzerland, from Argentina. So that's really exciting that your message here, even in this short and very dense 1 hour, has reached people from really from all over the world. So on behalf of Mind and Life Europe, it's just really wonderful to have you. Thank you for giving your time, sharing your wonderful research. And I want to thank the participants also from different time zones and different countries from being with us. And again, to invite you to take a look on our website, join the Mind and Life Friends. I think there's some really great offerings there. And first and foremost, again, Richie, a really warm thanks to you for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really pleasure to be with all of you. And I appreciate all you're doing. Thank you.